Welcome back to Placeology. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Megan.
And this week we are putting a place-based spin on a pop culture subject, actually a pop culture icon, Taylor Swift.
That's right, we decided to come up with a place that best represents each of Taylor Swift's 9 albums, from her country roots all the way to the powerhouse multi-genre artist that she is today. And before we get started, there's a few things we should mention. First of all, this whole video comes from a place of love for Taylor Swift. We are major Swifties ourselves, and have been since the very beginning.
Second, we did have a few ground rules when coming up with our list. We only chose places in the United States. Sorry, London. We didn't limit ourselves to just cities, but rather cities, regions, states, etc. And we didn't repeat any locations. Obviously, places like New York City are major influences throughout Taylor's work. Think about Cornelia Street on Lover, or Coney Island on Evermore. But we wanted to make sure a wide range of places were represented.
With all of that said, let's get started. For her first album, Taylor Swift, we chose the state of Georgia, or more broadly, the South. We chose the South because this album comes from her most country place, a small-town high schooler just writing music and dreaming of the fame that hadn't yet come to her. To us, it really feels like it could be any small town across the South.
We chose Georgia specifically, though, because of the lyric in the song Tim McGraw, which says, "The way my blue eyes shine put those Georgia stars to shame that night." And Georgia really is full of the type of small town that we picture Taylor writing these songs in. Small towns really dot the landscape in the northern and southern regions of the state, and it really embodies small town America.
You can just picture her in any of these places listening to the country music that she grew up on, like the Dixie Chicks, and then pouring her teenage heart out into songs like Teardrops on My Guitar, while trying to cope with teenage heartbreak. And it is this relatability that launched her career and put her on the map, all as she was writing her next album, Fearless.
As you might expect, we chose Nashville, Tennessee for Fearless. There are a bunch of reasons for this. For starters, it's where Taylor actually lived at the time and where she wrote and recorded most of the album. But even more than that, the album just feels like Nashville.
Right. With Fearless, she goes from the small and rural setting of the first album into the more glamorous city life of Nashville, and that glamour is reflected all over the album from the glitzy gold cover to the bigger productions of the songs. This album is more polished overall, and it's clear that she became more confident in her abilities as the success of her first album found her. She had just become the youngest person to single-handedly write and sing a Billboard Hot Country Songs chart #1 song, and in an industry most dominated by men, it really made her the queen of Nashville.
Her songwriting didn't suffer from her success, though, and even though the album represents a more glitzy city vibe, it still cuts deep with the ups and downs of being a teenager, and that just caused her star to rise even higher. Before we get to the next album, though, we should mention that we chose not to assign a separate place to the Taylor's version re-releases of her albums. Even though they may be sung from an older, wiser Taylor, they still have the same roots as the original with the same intended feelings.
For the next album, Speak Now, we struggled a bit more, but ultimately chose Charleston, South Carolina, to represent Taylor's third studio album. During this time, Taylor was still veritably a true country artist, but this album was a little lighter in style and composition. The title track, Speak Now, tells the story of someone who is crashing a wedding to pronounce their love for the groom. But what is most striking about the song is her vivid description of the wedding itself. Listeners find ourselves in the middle of the most elegant of weddings. Charleston, South Carolina, and the surrounding low country is known for its high-style, extravagant weddings that attracts even celebrity brides like Blake Lively and Hailey Bieber, as well as figure skater Tara Lipinski.
Lyrics from other songs on the album paint a picture that feels a lot like Charleston to us, too. Some examples include, "Do you remember we were sitting there by the water?" and also "All the lights on the water" in the song Mine. For this one, the video is also filmed by the water in a place that could easily be Charleston. Another set of lyrics from Sparks Fly also support this. "Drop everything now, meet me in the pouring rain, kiss me on the sidewalk, take away the pain." To us, this line is reminiscent of one of the most iconic romantic pouring rain scenes in Nicholas Sparks' book-turned-movie The Notebook, where Noah and Allie are at first fighting in the rain and then kiss. To tie this all together, The Notebook was filmed in and partially set in Charleston.
Along those same lines, though it isn't about the movie, the third track on Speak Now, Dear John, shares its name with another Nicholas Sparks movie that came out the same year. Like The Notebook, Dear John was filmed in Charleston. With all of these similarities, it became clear to us that Charleston was a great choice for this album.
For Taylor's fourth studio album, Red, we chose the Southwest, but we had perhaps the hardest time of any of the albums selecting a place to represent it. Sure, she mentions several cities in the lyrics of this album, and true to Taylor, it's clearly reminiscent of autumn. We considered LA, Boston, California, and just generally the suburbs because of its relatability. But in the end, we settled on the more general Southwest for a few reasons.
First, the album, and of course the song Red, reminds us of a mixture of deep reds, oranges, and browns. And while we could have picked some place with beautiful fall leaves, see our previous favorite fall places video on the Placeology channel for what one of those places might be, We decided to go with the Southwest because places like the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, Arches National Park, and Red Rocks Canyon, along with so many other places in this region, are the perfect mosaic of these shades all year round.
Additionally, the music video for I Knew You Were Trouble was filmed in and around LA, specifically at the desert-like Middleton Ranch, located just north of the city. More than the albums before it, Red especially deals with isolation as a theme, and with miles and miles of desert, the Southwest depicts this theme of isolation too. But within the Southwest, the isolation also gives way to urban and suburban spots in the same way that Red jumps from the quiet, all too well, straight into the feel-good 22. All in all, we felt like it would take an area as broad as the Southwest to encompass Red in all 30 of its tracks. Well, in Taylor's version, anyway.
And now we go from the hardest choice to make to possibly the easiest. For 1989, the city we chose to represent it was, and you probably guessed it, New York City. While Red does mention New York City in many of its lyrics, there is nothing on the previous album that so boldly proclaims New York City as the anthem, Welcome to New York. The phrase even adorned bus stops along the New York City streets during the 1989 album's era, and along these same lines, Taylor relocated to New York City in March of 2014 while writing the album.
Taylor also used New York imagery in both the artwork and videos for 1989. When it was released, the physical album came with 13 Polaroids, which heavily featured the New York skyline as a backdrop, also seen on the single covers for Wildest Dreams and New Romantics. The video for Blank Space, though filmed in Long Island, was partially filmed at the Woolworth estate, which is of course linked to the gorgeous Woolworth building in Lower Manhattan. And the woman that Taylor portrays in the video could, in all seriousness, be the story of many a Park Avenue princess.
But this album feels like New York for more reasons than just looks. It is baked into the album's sound. As Taylor's first true pop album, it truly sounds like leaving Nashville and its country-style music for a bigger city with a foot more grounded in pop music success, New York City. This was also her first album collaborating with Jack Antonoff, a well-known New York-based songwriter whose work often reflects much of the soul of New York City. The Antonoff-influenced synth-pop style of the album is reminiscent of NYC at its best, and songs like New Romantics and Shake It Off remind listeners of being young, exploring, and having fun, staying out too late, which is best done in the city that never sleeps.
Next up is Taylor's sixth album, Reputation, for which we chose Miami, Florida. With the darker vibe of Reputation being so different from her past work, this one took a little bit of thought for us, maybe because of the contrasting themes and sounds that pop up throughout the album. While Miami initially popped up on our radar because the Endgame video was partially shot there, it actually makes sense for more reasons than you might think.
While Taylor famously didn't do any interviews to promote Reputation, in later interviews, she described the album as feeling like evening night, and, quote, all cityscape and darkness. Along these lines, Miami is famous for its vibrant nightlife and party scene, in which the party Taylor describes in This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things would fit perfectly. In fact, in both that song and in Don't Blame Me, Taylor makes great Gatsby references, and while you typically think of New York with Gatsby, the bright and colorful Art Deco architecture in Miami Beach is arguably an even better surviving picture of the Gatsby days.
And finally, just like how the sound of 1989 was directly influenced by New York City, the hip-hop subgenre of Miami bass is present in the composition of Reputation. Miami bass is a subgenre of hip-hop music popularized in the 80s and 90s and helps to give Reputation its more urban sound.
Next up, Lover. Talk about a major shift in vibes from one of Taylor Swift's darker, edgier albums to arguably one of her most soft and sweet. Los Angeles just felt like the right choice for Lover. The first reason that we chose LA for this album is the pastel colors of the album artwork. It calls to mind the colors of a sunset, which LA area beaches are famous for.
Then there's the iconic You Need to Calm Down music video, which genuinely feels like one of the most LA things that Taylor has done, from the cat-eye sunglasses to the dramatic hot pink jacket. She gives off Hollywood glam vibes, and many of the celebrity cameos are well-known LA-based friends of Taylor's. Lover was also partially recorded in Los Angeles, which certainly may have had an impact on why it feels so much like the city. Further, initially Taylor planned 2 festivals to celebrate the album, Loverfest East in Massachusetts and Loverfest West, which was to be held in LA in the summer of 2020.
Unfortunately, the festivals were canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Still, Taylor has described the album as being full of lighthearted summer vibes, which feel very much like Los Angeles, which is sometimes called the city of flowers and sunshine. The perfect place to foster a lighthearted summer feeling. In the end, Lover has some of her most lighthearted poppy songs. It feels the most like a pop star of any of her albums, and since many pop stars live and work in LA, it's hard not to link the two.
For the next album, Folklore, we agreed that New England felt like the right place to describe the album. The album was born out of the pandemic quarantine in 2020, which grounded many singers' touring plans for the year. The result for many singers, including Taylor, was new music and unexpected albums. All of that said, it likely means that much of this album was written at Taylor's home, Holiday House, in Watch Hill, Rhode Island. One specific album track, The Last Great American Dynasty, would definitely seem to prove this idea to be true, as the track tells the story of Holiday House, and how Taylor eventually became the owner of the historic home.
The cover art for this album appears to show Taylor lost in the woods, implying more isolation than with past albums, something that feels like wandering through the Berkshires or along a cold and secluded coastline. The album and its artwork is also associated with cottagecore, which is an aesthetic that involves a cozy, comfy home, typically a cottage in a rural setting. Since the New England cottage is typically considered to be warm and cozy in much the same way, it is easy to see how this area is the perfect place for folklore.
Alright, before we get to Taylor's ninth and most recent album, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and let us know what other place-based content you'd like to see.
And last, but certainly not least, we have Evermore. For this one, we chose the Pacific Northwest. Taylor herself refers to Evermore and Folklore as sister albums, with Evermore being created out of what Taylor has called a weird avalanche of songwriting that the joy and successes of Folklore created. Because of the similarities in the two albums, we knew that the place that we chose for Evermore had to carry forth themes of isolation and coziness. So we thought of the Pacific Northwest, where the deep woods and high peaks of the Cascades create the perfect backdrop for more storytelling.
Taylor has also said that this album feels more like fall and winter to her than Folklore, which also made the Pacific Northwest feel appropriate, with the lovely fall colors that much of the area is known for and the many snowy places that there are to see in this region. The dreary, rainy reputation that Seattle has fits right in with this, and we all know that Taylor is a super fan of Grey's Anatomy, which is set in Seattle. There's even a fan theory about a Grey's plotline inspiring the song Closure on Evermore.
Additionally, the album's third track, Gold Rush, brings images to mind just upon seeing the title of the American Gold Rush, in which people flock to places like Northern California and Oregon to try their luck at striking gold. Altogether, these Easter eggs, worthy of Taylor herself, seemed like enough evidence to call Evermore for the Pacific Northwest.
So there you have it. All of Taylor Swift's albums represented by cities. Let us know in the comments below what you think of our choices. Is there a better city or place to describe any of her albums?
And if you love videos like this one, please remember to subscribe. Thanks, everyone!